Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. What happens when a woman orchestrates an elaborate loyalty test using her own sister as bait, only to discover her boyfriend knew all along and has been building a legal case for emotional distress and defamation? When I convinced my sister Ivy to flirt with Ethan at that party, I thought I was being smart, protecting myself from future heartbreak. Now, standing in the office tower lobby with a civil lawsuit in my hands, I realize the only person who betrayed trust was me. I've always believed that trust is earned, not given. That's what I told myself that Tuesday morning when I watched Ethan making breakfast in my kitchen, humming along to some song on his phone. He looked so content, so comfortable, flipping pancakes like he didn't have a care in the world. And that's exactly what bothered me. He was too comfortable, too relaxed, like he'd already won me over and didn't have to try anymore. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through Instagram, when I saw it. A notification that Ethan had been tagged in a photo. I clicked on it and saw him at a work event, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. She was pretty, dark hair, bright smile, leaning in close while they both looked at someone's laptop screen. The caption read, "Late nights with the best team, our project launch." Ethan brought over my plate of pancakes and kissed the top of my head. I asked him about the photo. I kept my voice casual, like I was just curious. He glanced at my phone and said that was Jasmine, one of his colleagues. They'd been working on a big project together for the past few weeks. I asked why he hadn't mentioned her before. He said he had. He'd talked about the project team several times. I said I didn't remember hearing about any Jasmine. He paused, spatula still in hand, and looked at me with that patient expression he always wore when I got like this. He said he was sure he'd mentioned her, but if I didn't remember, that was okay. It was just work. Just work. That phrase irritated me. Men always said things were just work, or just a friend, right before you found out they'd been lying the whole time. I ate my pancakes in silence while Ethan cleaned up the kitchen. He asked if I wanted to do anything that weekend. I said I didn't know yet. He said he'd be free, so just let him know. Then he kissed me goodbye and left for the office. After he was gone, I sat there staring at that photo for another 20 minutes. Jasmine's hand wasn't touching him, but it was close. And she was leaning in, and Ethan was smiling. That easy, genuine smile he used to reserve just for me. I needed to know if I could trust him. Really trust him. Because I'd been burned before, twice, by men who'd seemed loyal right up until they weren't. At work that afternoon, I couldn't focus. I kept checking Ethan's social media, looking for more signs. There weren't any, but that almost made it worse. What if he was being careful? What if he was hiding something? During my lunch break, I found Nina in the break room. Nina Ortega was my work friend, the person I told everything to. She was mixing creamer into her coffee when I sat down across from her and said I needed advice. She asked what was wrong. I showed her the photo. She looked at it, then at me, and asked what the problem was. I said the problem was that I didn't know this woman, that Ethan had never mentioned her, and that they looked awfully cozy for just co-workers. Nina said I was probably overthinking it, but I could tell she was intrigued. I said I wasn't sure I could trust Ethan anymore, that I needed to know if he was really committed or if he was just keeping me around until something better came along. She asked what I was going to do. I said I didn't know yet, but I needed to find out the truth before I invested any more time in this relationship. We'd been together for 2 years, and if he was going to cheat, I wanted to know now before things got more serious. Nina leaned in and said she'd heard of people doing loyalty tests, setting up situations to see how their partners would react. I asked what she meant. She said, having a friend flirt with them to see if they'd take the bait. She said it was controversial, but at least you'd know for sure. The idea stuck with me for the rest of the day. A loyalty test. It made sense in a way. If Ethan was truly committed, he'd pass. And if he wasn't, I'd find out before I wasted any more of my life on him. That evening, I called my sister Ivy. She was 4 years younger than me, still trying to make it as an actress, which meant she was great at playing roles. I asked if she could meet me for coffee the next day. She said sure. She wasn't working until the evening shift at the restaurant. The next morning, we met at our usual coffee shop. Ivy ordered some elaborate latte with extra foam, and I got a plain black coffee. We sat by the window, and I told her about Ethan and the photo and my doubts. She listened, nodding in all the right places. Then I told her my idea. I wanted to test Ethan's loyalty. I wanted to see if he'd stay faithful when tempted, and I needed her help. Ivy's face changed. She asked what kind of help. I said I needed her to flirt with him, to see if he'd flirt back. She immediately said no, that was weird and wrong. I said it wasn't wrong. It was smart. I said I needed to know if Ethan was the real deal or if he was just another guy who'd cheat the moment I wasn't looking. Ivy said I was being paranoid. I said I was being careful. There's a difference. She said Ethan had never given me a reason not to trust him. I said that's exactly when you need to be most careful, when everything seems perfect. I could see her wavering. I pressed harder. I said she'd just have to talk to him at a party, maybe touch his arm a few times, see how he reacted. Nothing serious, just enough to test him. I said if he was loyal, he'd shut her down immediately, and then I'd know he was worth keeping. And if he wasn't, I'd have saved myself from future heartbreak. She asked if Ethan would know it was a setup. I said absolutely not. That would defeat the purpose. She said it felt dishonest. I said relationships required vigilance. Our mother had always said that. You had to know who you were dealing with before you gave them your whole heart. Ivy was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte with a little wooden stick. Finally, she said she'd think about it. I said I needed an answer soon. I was planning a group hangout for Saturday, and it would be the perfect opportunity. That night, I was lying in bed next to Ethan. He was reading something on his tablet, occasionally chuckling at whatever article he'd found. I asked what was so funny. He said it was a tech blog roasting some new startup's terrible user interface. He tried to show me, but I wasn't interested. I asked him about his day. He said it was good. They'd hit a major milestone on the project. I asked if Jasmine was happy about it. He looked at me with a slight frown and said, yeah, the whole team was happy. Then he asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He didn't look convinced, but he let it drop. He put his tablet on the nightstand and rolled over to kiss me goodnight. I kissed him back, but kept my eyes open, watching his face. He looked so peaceful, so trusting. It almost made me feel guilty. Almost. After he fell asleep, I quietly picked up his phone from the nightstand. I knew his passcode. He'd given it to me months ago, said he had nothing to hide. I unlocked it and started scrolling through his messages. Nothing suspicious. His texts with Jasmine were all work-related. Professional. Boring even. I checked his email. Again, nothing. Just project updates and meeting invitations. I was about to put the phone back when I noticed his calendar app. I opened it and saw a reminder for Thursday. Downtown, 3:24 p.m. No other details, no location, no description, just that time. My heart started beating faster. What was downtown? Why was the time so specific? Why no details? I heard Ethan shift in his sleep, and I quickly locked his phone and put it back. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. That appointment felt like proof. Proof that he was hiding something. Proof that I was right to be suspicious. The next morning, I texted Ivy. I said I really needed her help with this. That I was scared Ethan was hiding things from me, and I needed to know the truth. She texted back an hour later saying, okay, she'd do it. but just this once, and I owed her big time. I felt a rush of relief. Finally, I'd have answers. Finally, I'd know if Ethan was worth my trust, or if I needed to cut my losses and move on. That afternoon, Ethan came home early. He said he'd finished his work and wanted to surprise me. He'd brought takeout from my favorite Thai place. We ate together on the couch, watching a show we'd been binge-watching for weeks. Everything felt normal, perfect even, but I kept thinking about that calendar reminder. Downtown, 3:24 p.m. What was he doing? Who was he meeting? I asked him casually if he had plans for Thursday. He said just some errands he needed to run. I asked what kind of errands. He said boring stuff, personal things he'd been putting off. Then he changed the subject and asked about my weekend plans. I said I was thinking about organizing a casual hangout at that rooftop bar we liked. Maybe invite some friends, keep it low-key. He said that sounded great. He'd love to come. I smiled and said perfect. Inside, I was already planning every detail. Where Ivy would stand, what she'd wear, how I'd position myself to watch without being obvious. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. That night, after Ethan went to work on some code in the living room, I went into the bedroom and opened his laptop. It was sitting on the dresser, still powered on. The screen showed his desktop, neat, organized folders labeled with things like work projects and photos and taxes. But there was one folder that caught my eye. It was labeled Personal 2025. I clicked on it, but it was password protected. A separate password, not his usual one. Why would he need a password-protected folder? What was he hiding in there? I tried a few obvious passwords. Our anniversary, his birthday, my birthday. Nothing worked. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly closed the laptop and pretended to be looking for something in the closet. Ethan appeared in the doorway and asked if I'd seen his charger. I said I thought it was in the living room. He thanked me and left. My hands were shaking. A password-protected folder, a mysterious downtown appointment, a female coworker he'd supposedly mentioned but I didn't remember. The pieces were adding up, and none of them were good. I texted Ivy again. Saturday, rooftop bar, 8 p.m. Wear something nice, this is important. She replied, I already said yes, relax. But I couldn't relax. Not until I knew the truth. Not until I knew if Ethan Reeves was the man he pretended to be, or just another liar waiting to break my heart. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I spent the entire day preparing, choosing my outfit, planning the seating arrangements in my head, coaching Ivy over text messages about exactly how to approach Ethan. She was growing increasingly reluctant, sending messages like, "Are you sure about this?" and "What if he gets mad?" I told her that if he got mad, that would prove he had something to hide. Innocent people don't get defensive. By 7:30 that evening, I was already at the rooftop bar with Nina and 3 other friends from work. The place was perfect, dim lighting, city skyline views, plenty of space to spread out but intimate enough that I could watch everything unfold. I'd specifically chosen a table near the railing with a clear view of the entrance and the bar area. Nina asked why I seemed so nervous. I said I wasn't nervous, just excited to see everyone. She gave me a knowing look but didn't push it. She knew what tonight was really about. Ethan texted me at 7:45 saying he was on his way. I replied with a heart emoji and told him we were at the usual spot on the west side. Ivy texted around the same time saying she was outside and asking if she should come up yet. I told her to wait 15 minutes. I wanted Ethan to settle in first, get comfortable, have a drink in his hand. When Ethan arrived, he looked relaxed and happy. He was wearing dark jeans and a fitted button-down shirt that I'd always liked on him. He made his way to our table, greeting everyone warmly, giving me a kiss on the cheek. He ordered a beer from the passing waiter and settled into the chair next to me. For a few minutes, everything was normal. We talked about work, about the unseasonably warm weather, about a movie someone wanted to see. Ethan was his usual charming self, attentive, funny, engaged. I watched him carefully, looking for any signs of distraction or discomfort. There were none. At 8:15, I texted Ivy, "Now, go to the bar, he's wearing a blue shirt." A few minutes later, I saw Ivy step out of the elevator. She'd followed my instructions perfectly. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled in loose waves, makeup more dramatic than she usually wore. She looked beautiful, younger than her 27 years, fresh and vibrant, exactly the kind of woman who could turn heads. She walked to the bar and ordered a drink, positioning herself where Ethan would have to notice her if he looked that direction. My heart was pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. I pretended to be engaged in conversation with Nina, but my attention was locked on Ethan. He was listening to our friend Brad tell some story about a disastrous client meeting. He laughed at the punchline, took a sip of his beer, and then glanced toward the bar, probably looking for our waiter. That's when he saw Ivy. I watched his face carefully. There was a flicker of recognition, a slight confusion, like he was trying to place her. Of course he recognized her. He'd met her twice before at family gatherings, but he probably wasn't expecting to see her here. Ivy caught his eye and smiled. A big, bright, deliberately flirtatious smile. Then she walked toward our table. My pulse was racing. This was happening. This was really happening. Ivy approached with her drink in hand and called out Ethan's name like she was surprised to see him. She said she didn't know he'd be here. Ethan stood up, always the gentleman, and greeted her warmly. He said it was Cora's event. He hadn't known she was coming either. He asked how she'd been. Ivy said she'd been great, just busy with auditions and her restaurant job. She touched his arm lightly when she said it, letting her hand linger just a moment too long. I watched Ethan's face. He smiled politely but didn't lean into the touch, didn't reciprocate. Ivy asked if she could join us. I said of course, grabbed a chair from a nearby empty table and made room. I positioned the chair right next to Ethan. He gave me a slight look, questioning, maybe a little uncomfortable, but he sat back down. For the next 20 minutes, Ivy worked her magic. She laughed loudly at Ethan's jokes. She asked him questions about his work, leaning in close like she was fascinated by every word. She touched his arm again when she made a point, then his shoulder when she laughed. She suggested they do a shot together, said she loved a man who could keep up with her. Ethan was polite but clearly uncomfortable. He kept creating physical distance, shifting his chair slightly away, keeping his hands on his beer glass. When Ivy suggested the shot, he declined and said he was driving. When she asked about his work, he gave short, professional answers and then redirected the conversation to include the whole table. I should have felt relieved. He was passing the test. He was being loyal. But something felt off. The way he kept glancing at me, not with guilt, but with confusion. Like he was trying to figure out what was going on. Then Ivy escalated. She said the rooftop bar was getting crowded and asked if Ethan wanted to go somewhere quieter where they could actually talk. She said there was a great whiskey bar just 2 blocks away. She touched his knee under the table. I saw her arm move. Ethan immediately stood up. He said thanks, but no thanks. He said he was here with his girlfriend and their friends, and he was planning to stay. Ivy pressed, saying it would just be for one drink, that she barely got to see him and wanted to catch up properly. Ethan's voice got firmer. He said he appreciated the invitation, but he wasn't interested in going anywhere. He said he was committed to me and wasn't going to leave this table. Ivy looked hurt. She was a good actress and said she didn't mean anything by it. She just wanted to hang out. That's when Damien Cross appeared. Damien was Ethan's best friend and roommate. I hadn't invited him. I didn't even know he was coming. He walked up to our table and immediately clocked the situation. He looked at Ivy, then at Ethan, then at me. His face hardened. He asked Ethan if he could talk to him privately. Ethan looked relieved and said sure. They walked toward the far side of the rooftop, near the heating lamps. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Damien talking intensely, gesturing toward our table. Ethan's expression changed. The confusion turned to something else, something colder. They talked for maybe 2 minutes. Then Ethan pulled out his phone and checked something. His face went pale. He looked across the rooftop directly at me. I felt my stomach drop. They walked back to the table together. Ethan didn't sit down. He stood behind his chair and asked me if we could talk. In private. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. I said we could talk here. He said no, we couldn't. He said we needed to talk in the stairwell, now. Everyone at the table had gone quiet. Nina was staring at her drink. Brad was suddenly very interested in his phone. Ivy looked like she wanted to disappear. I stood up and followed Ethan to the stairwell. The door closed behind us, muffling the music and chatter from the bar. The concrete walls made everything echo. Ethan turned to face me. He asked me directly if I'd set this up, if I'd asked Ivy to flirt with him. I felt my face flush. I tried to deflect. I asked what he was talking about. He said Damien had just told him everything, that Damien had run into Ivy outside, and she'd been nervous, practicing what to say, and when he'd asked her what was wrong, she'd admitted that I'd asked her to test Ethan's loyalty. My mind raced. I said that wasn't true, that Damien must have misunderstood. Ethan pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. It was a text from Ivy to him. The timestamp was from 30 seconds ago. The message read, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have agreed to this. Cora asked me to flirt with you to test if you'd cheat. I feel terrible. You didn't deserve this." I felt the ground shift under my feet. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Ethan asked me again, "Did I set this up? Did I actually ask my own sister to seduce me to see if I'd fail some kind of loyalty test?" I tried to explain. I said I'd been worried, that I'd seen him with Jasmine in that photo and didn't know who she was, that he'd been secretive about things, like that downtown appointment, that I'd just wanted to be sure, to protect myself, to know that I could trust him before things got more serious. His expression didn't change. He said I could have just asked him, could have talked to me like an adult, could have expressed my concerns instead of orchestrating some manipulative scheme. I said I had asked him. He'd said it was just work and just errands, but he hadn't given me real answers. He said he'd given me the only answers there were, the truth. He said Jasmine was a co-worker, nothing more. He said the downtown appointment was to meet with a jeweler because he'd been looking at engagement rings. The words hit me like a physical blow. Engagement rings. He'd been planning to propose. He said he'd wanted it to be a surprise. He'd been saving for months, researching jewelers, trying to figure out what style I'd like. He said that folder on his laptop, the password-protected one, contained photos of rings he'd been considering and notes about proposal ideas. I felt tears burning in my eyes. I said I didn't know, that I'd been scared because of past relationships, because I'd been hurt before. He said that wasn't an excuse. He said I'd humiliated him, violated his trust, and proven that I didn't respect him or our relationship. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. He said he needed time to think, that he couldn't be around me right now. I begged him not to leave like this, to let me explain more, to give me a chance to fix it. He said some things couldn't be fixed, not with words, not with apologies. He said trust was the foundation of everything, and I'd just taken a sledgehammer to it. Then he turned and walked down the stairs. I followed him, calling his name, but he didn't stop. He walked through the lobby and out onto the street. I stood in the doorway, watching him disappear into the crowd. When I got back upstairs, everyone was packing up to leave. Nina said she'd heard some of what happened and suggested we all call it a night. Ivy was crying, apologizing over and over. I told her to stop, that it was fine, but my voice came out harsh and cold. I took an Uber home alone. The whole ride, I kept replaying Ethan's words, the hurt in his eyes, the way he'd pulled away from my touch, the engagement ring. When I got to my apartment, I went straight to the kitchen counter where we always left our keys. Ethan's spare key to my apartment was sitting there. He'd already been here. He'd already dropped it off and left. I picked up the key and felt something break inside me. He was done. This wasn't just a fight. This was the end. I tried calling him. It went to voicemail. I tried texting. No response. I lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I'd just been trying to protect myself, to be smart, to avoid getting hurt. Instead, I'd destroyed the best thing I'd ever had. The next few days were a blur. Ethan wouldn't answer my calls or texts. Ivy was avoiding me, sending short, guilt-ridden messages saying she needed space. Even Nina was being weird at work, giving me sympathetic looks but not really engaging the way she used to. I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything except the image of Ethan walking away down those stairs. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. I texted Ivy and asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she was working, but she could do a quick meeting during her break. We met at the same coffee shop where I'd first pitched the loyalty test idea. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ivy looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She ordered tea instead of her usual elaborate latte. We sat by the window, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally, Ivy said she felt terrible, that she should never have agreed to help me, that what we'd done was wrong. I felt a flash of anger. I said we hadn't done anything wrong. We just tested him, and he'd passed. Wasn't that a good thing? Didn't that prove he was loyal? Ivy stared at me like I'd grown a second head. She said the test itself was the problem, that I'd manipulated both of them, put Ethan in an uncomfortable position, and violated his trust. She said Damien had texted her after the party, saying Ethan was devastated, that he'd been planning to propose, and now he didn't know if he could trust me ever again. I said he was overreacting, that if he really loved me, he'd understand why I needed to be sure, that I'd been hurt before, and I was just protecting myself. Ivy's expression hardened. She said protecting myself wasn't the same as manipulating people. She said Ethan had never given me a reason to doubt him, and I'd created a problem where none existed. She said I needed to take responsibility for what I'd done instead of justifying it. I felt defensive. I said she didn't understand, that she'd never been in a serious relationship that fell apart because the guy turned out to be a liar, that I'd been cheated on twice before, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. She said that wasn't Ethan's fault, that I was punishing him for what other men had done. She said if I couldn't trust anyone, I shouldn't be in a relationship at all. Her words stung. I said I thought she was supposed to be on my side. She said she was on the side of what was right, and what I'd done wasn't right. We sat in uncomfortable silence. Then Ivy said she had to get back to work. She hugged me quickly, but it felt obligatory. Cold. She said she loved me, but she couldn't support what I'd done. Then she left. I sat there alone, nursing my cold coffee, feeling more isolated than ever. That evening, I went to my gym. I needed to blow off steam, to do something physical to stop my mind from spinning. In the locker room afterward, I ran into a few acquaintances, women I'd chatted with casually over the months but didn't know well. One of them, Kelly, asked if I was okay. She said I seemed stressed. Before I could stop myself, the whole story came pouring out. I told them about the photo of Ethan with Jasmine, about the mysterious downtown appointment, about the loyalty test, about Ethan's reaction. I framed it carefully. I said I'd had legitimate concerns, that Ethan had been secretive, that I'd just wanted to verify what he'd told me. I said he'd overreacted, and now he was refusing to talk to me, which proved he was being defensive because he had something to hide. Kelly and another woman, Andrea, listened with wide eyes. Andrea said it sounded like I'd been smart to check, that you couldn't be too careful these days. Kelly said her ex-husband had seemed trustworthy too. right up until she found out about his affair. Their validation felt good. It felt like confirmation that I'd been right, that Ethan was the problem, not me. Another woman, Shauna, was quieter. She asked if Ethan had actually done anything wrong, or if I'd just been suspicious. I said the point was that I needed to know for sure. Shauna said it sounded like he hadn't done anything wrong then. That he'd passed the test. I said yes, but now he was angry, which meant he was making it about him instead of understanding my perspective. Shauna didn't say anything else, but I saw her exchange a look with another woman. A look I didn't like. Later that night, I called my mother. Margaret Blackwood had always been my sounding board, the person who understood me best. She answered on the second ring and immediately asked what was wrong. She could always tell when something was bothering me. I told her everything. The test, Ethan's reaction, the engagement ring, how isolated I felt now. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said I'd done the right thing. She said smart women verify what they're told, that men often present one face while hiding another. She said she'd tested my father early in their relationship. She'd had a friend flirt with him at a party to see how he'd react. He'd failed, actually, flirted back, and she'd almost ended things right there. But they'd worked through it, and she'd kept him on his toes ever since. I felt a wave of relief. My mother understood. She said Ethan was probably just embarrassed that he'd been tested, that his ego was bruised. She said if he really loved me, he'd get over it. She said men needed to be kept accountable, needed to prove themselves. We talked for over an hour. By the end of the call, I felt vindicated. My mother was right. Ethan would calm down and realize I'd been smart, not manipulative. The next day, I suggested we meet somewhere to talk. I wanted to see her in person, to hear more of her reassurance. She said she was free that afternoon and suggested we walk along the riverside embankment. She liked to walk when she had serious conversations. We met around 4 o'clock. The weather was perfect. Warm sun, light breeze, the water sparkling. We walked slowly, and my mother continued to validate everything I'd done. She said women had to protect themselves, had to be strategic, had to test the men in their lives, because men couldn't always be trusted. I was nodding along, feeling more confident, when I saw someone jogging toward us. As the figure got closer, I recognized the blue running jacket. Ethan. He was jogging alone, headphones in, focused on the path ahead. He hadn't seen us yet. My mother was mid-sentence, saying something about how men needed to be kept on their toes when Ethan jogged past us. He looked up, saw me, and his pace slowed. He pulled out one earbud. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then his eyes shifted to my mother, and something in his expression changed. It was subtle, but I saw it. A tightening around his eyes. A coldness. My mother, oblivious, greeted him warmly. She said it was good to see him, and asked how he'd been. Ethan said he'd been fine. His voice was flat, polite but distant. My mother, in her infinite lack of tact, said she'd heard about the misunderstanding at the party. She said she was sure Ethan and I would work things out. She said all couples had these little tests, and it was healthy to make sure everyone was on the same page. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said it wasn't a test. It was a manipulation. He said there was a difference between healthy communication and orchestrating deceptive schemes. He said he'd lost respect for Cora, and he was consulting with people about his options moving forward. My mother frowned. She asked what he meant by consulting with people. Ethan said exactly what it sounded like. He said he was exploring all available avenues to address what had happened. Then he put his earbud back in and continued jogging. I stood there, frozen. My mother asked what he meant by all available avenues. I said I didn't know, but a cold dread was settling in my chest. Later that evening, I couldn't shake the encounter. Consulting with people, exploring avenues. What did that mean? Was he talking to a therapist, a mediator, or something worse? I tried to push the thoughts away. Ethan was hurt. He was angry. But he'd calm down. He had to, except he didn't seem like someone who was just angry. He seemed like someone who was planning something, and I had no idea what. The following week was torture. Ethan continued to ignore my messages. Damien, who I'd hoped might mediate, had blocked me on social media. Even Ivy wasn't responding to my texts anymore. I felt like I was losing my mind. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Ethan. It never was. Late one night, around 2 a.m, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that password-protected folder on Ethan's laptop, the one labeled Personal 2025. He'd said it contained photos of engagement rings, but what if there was more? What if there were other secrets? Some of Ethan's things were still at my apartment. Clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, a jacket hanging on the back of the bedroom door. I went through the jacket pockets, feeling invasive but unable to stop myself. In the inside pocket, I found a small notebook, leather-bound, about the size of my palm. I opened it and started reading. My blood ran cold. The notebook contained dated entries, written in Ethan's neat handwriting. They weren't journal entries. They were more like incident reports. Each one was brief, factual, and devastating. March 12th, C accused me of flirting with barista at coffee shop. Barista was male. False accusation. April 3rd, C checked my phone while I was in shower, confronted me about text from my sister, claimed I was being secretive. April 20th, C asked where I was going when I left for dentist appointment, didn't believe me, later found tracking app installed on my phone without my knowledge or consent. May 8th, C interrogated me about female coworker in project photo. No inappropriate contact occurred. C refused to accept explanation. There were more, pages of them, months of documentation showing a pattern I hadn't even realized I was creating. I felt sick. This wasn't how it had happened. These entries made me sound crazy, controlling, paranoid. I'd just been concerned. I'd just been protecting myself. But seeing it all laid out like this, in black and white, with dates and times, it looked bad. I put the notebook back in the jacket and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. Why was Ethan documenting this? What was he planning to do with it? A few days later, my mother called and said she was hosting a family dinner that Saturday. She said she'd invited Ethan because she wanted to help us reconcile. She said sometimes these things required family intervention. I told her I didn't think Ethan would come. She said he'd already accepted the invitation. She said his father Leonard would be joining too, since they'd met a few times at family events and gotten along well. I didn't want to go, but my mother insisted. She said running away from problems never solved anything. Saturday evening arrived, and I showed up at the restaurant my mother had chosen, a nice place with private dining rooms. When I walked in, I saw my mother, my aunt, and 2 cousins already seated, and at the far end of the table, Ethan and Leonard. My stomach dropped. Leonard Reeves was a retired attorney. I'd met him twice before and found him intimidating, sharp, observant, asking questions that felt more like cross-examinations than small talk. Ethan barely looked at me when I sat down. His father greeted me politely but coolly. Dinner started awkwardly. My mother tried to keep conversation flowing, asking Leonard about his retirement and Ethan about work. Leonard answered in measured tones. Ethan was mostly silent. Then my mother, in what she thought was a helpful move, brought up the loyalty test. She said she was sure it was all a big misunderstanding, that I'd just been looking out for myself, and Ethan should appreciate that I cared enough to want to be sure about our relationship. The table went quiet. Leonard set down his fork and looked at my mother. He asked her if she'd just said she thought the loyalty test was justified. My mother said yes, of course. She said women needed to protect themselves, that men often weren't forthcoming, and sometimes you had to verify what they told you. Leonard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He asked my mother if she understood that orchestrating a deceptive scheme involving a third party could constitute emotional distress. He asked if she realized that making false public statements about someone's character could be defamation. My mother looked confused. She said she didn't know what he was talking about. This was a relationship issue, not a legal matter. Leonard said that's where she was wrong. He said that when someone's reputation is damaged by false accusations, when they're subjected to humiliating tests and public scrutiny based on manufactured concerns, those were actionable behaviors. I felt my face go hot. I said I hadn't made any false accusations. Leonard looked at me directly. He said I'd told multiple people that Ethan was suspicious, untrustworthy, and potentially unfaithful. He said I'd orchestrated a public loyalty test that humiliated him in front of friends. He said I'd violated his privacy by installing tracking software on his phone without consent. I stammered. I said I'd never installed tracking software. Leonard pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. It was from Ethan's phone, showing an app I'd installed months ago. One of those Find My Partner apps that I'd said was for safety but really used to monitor his location. I said that was different. That was just to keep him safe. Leonard said that was surveillance. That was a violation of privacy, potentially illegal depending on the jurisdiction. My mother tried to defend me. She said I was just being careful, that I'd been hurt in the past. Leonard said that didn't give me the right to harm someone else. The dinner deteriorated from there. My cousins stared at their plates. My aunt quietly excused herself. Ethan sat in silence, his face unreadable. Finally, my mother said this was getting out of hand. She said families should support each other, not tear each other apart with legal threats. Leonard said he wasn't making threats. He was pointing out facts. He said if Ethan chose to take legal action, he'd have substantial grounds. He said patterns of controlling behavior, invasion of privacy, and public defamation were all actionable. I looked at Ethan. I begged him with my eyes to say something, to tell his father to back off, to tell everyone this was all a misunderstanding. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, thanked my mother for dinner, and walked out. Leonard followed him. I sat there, humiliated, as the remaining family members avoided eye contact. My mother was furious, not at me, but at Leonard. She said he was overreacting, that he was being dramatic, that men always turned things around to make women look like the bad guys. But I barely heard her. I was thinking about Leonard's words, legal action, actionable behaviors, grounds for a case. After dinner, I walked to the parking garage in a daze. I needed to get to my car and go home and figure out what to do next. That's when I saw Ethan's car. It was parked on the lower level, facing the exit ramp. Through the window, I could see a folder on the passenger seat. It was labeled Documentation Privacy Violation. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. On top of the folder was a sticky note. Even from outside the car, I could read the words, Photos, Backup Cloud. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Ethan standing a few feet away, keys in hand. He'd been walking to his car and found me snooping again. He asked me calmly to step away from his vehicle. I said I just wanted to talk. He said we'd talked enough. He said from now on, all communication would go through appropriate channels. I asked what that meant. He said I'd find out soon enough. He unlocked the car, got in, and drove away. I stood there in the empty parking garage, the fluorescent lights humming above me, and realized that whatever was coming, I wasn't prepared for it. The next 2 weeks crawled. Ethan blocked me everywhere. Damien threatened harassment charges if I tried again. Work blurred, sleep evaded. Nina stayed neutral, stopped inviting me out. Ivy ghosted until I ambushed her at the restaurant. She said she loved me but couldn't defend my cruelty. She'd already agreed to Ethan's statement. I showed up at his apartment. Damien slammed the door. You showed your colors. He's done. That evening on my balcony, Ethan appeared with my spare key. Not to reconcile, to return it. He'd documented everything. Control, surveillance, humiliation. Some illegal, some compensable. Love isn't abuse, he said, He was done. Days later at the co-working space, I saw him with Jessica Morales, attorney, reviewing files. She handed me her card. Contact through counsel only. Further approaches, genre harassment. Rush hour metro. Ethan boarded, ignored me. Text preview. Documentation complete. Filing Monday. He'd been building the case for months. I'd handed him the evidence. I was out of moves. Monday morning, dread clung to me like fog. I dragged myself to work, movement sluggish and wrong. At 10:30, Nina texted, "Someone in the lobby for me." Assuming a client, I descended. There stood Ethan with Leonard and Jessica Morales from the co-working space, briefcase in hand. Leonard stern, Ethan distant. Stomach plummeting, I approached. Jessica reintroduced herself, handed a thick envelope. I was served a civil complaint, Ethan Reeves versus Cordelia Blackwood. Charges: intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, invasion of privacy. She explained, damages for my controlling behavior, loyalty test humiliation, false claims of his untrustworthiness, and secret tracking app on his phone. Evidence: screenshots of my posts and messages, witness statements from Ivy and Damien, Ethan's notebook of my patterns, forensic proof of surveillance. I whispered it was a misunderstanding, just protection. Ethan said I'd made it public, violated trust repeatedly. Leonard: actions have consequences. Trust can't be manipulated back. Tears fell. I said I loved him. He replied, "That's not love, it's control." Onlookers stared, co-workers whispered, phones emerged. Jessica added a restraining order notice for stalking. Uninvited visits, ignored no contact requests, tracking software. 30 days to respond, get a lawyer, communicate via attorneys only. They left. I stood frozen, clutching pages quoting my venomous words, the loyalty test dissected coldly. Mom texted, "Ethan suing you." No reply. Nina guided me to the elevator. In the mirrored doors, pale, broken, holding my destruction. I'd thought I was careful. I was the destroyer. Ethan documented quietly, loyal to his dignity. I'd tested him and lost everything. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.